about press conference at the Foreign Correspondents School of Japan. My name is Teddy Jimbo. I run web-based internet TV media called vnews.com, and I'm your moderator today. And we have actually a series of speakers today who represent mostly citizens groups which opposes the national funeral of former Prime Minister Abe. And one person is going to speak remotely from Hokkaido. So I'm going to just briefly explain each one of them, and then I'll give the microphone to them. And I'm hoping that the speeches will be over in half an hour period, and open the remaining half an hour for Q&A from the floor as well as from online. Okay, so I will just introduce my speaker right next to me, Masaki Ina. Then we have Ken Takada Ken-san. And then we have lawyer郷路柾記san from Hokkaido, who is on screen, and he will be speaking remotely. And then we have we didn't have enough space for all the people, so we have a lawyer,梓澤Sensei, Kazuyuki梓澤. He's sitting in the front row in the white jacket. He'll be also giving a very brief comment. And also we will have Sakamoto, and we also have Yoko Sakamoto, who is also sitting in the front row. So they'll be each of them will be speaking briefly, and then they will tell you why they oppose the national funeral. And by the way, this network of citizens groups actually consisting of 83 nationwide citizens groups, and which I was told that it is the largest citizens movement network in Japan, 83 organizations. So as Susan said, let me give the microphone to you first. You want to go first, right? And by the way, some speech is going to be in English and some are going to be in Japanese. And when it is in Japanese, we have an interpreter, Mineko Hino-san, sitting on the other end of the front desk. So, Sensei, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your coming. Let's start our press conference on opposing the state funeral for the Prime Minister Abe. Our desire for this conference is to send overseas the situation, the logic, and the live feeling of anti-movement of the Japanese people against this funeral. First, let me introduce each of the three speakers. First, Mr. Takada, joint representative of Don't Wage War, Don't Destroy Article 9 Joint Action Committee. Next is Mr. Ina, former professor of International Christian University, who is majoring in Constitution. Then the third speaker will be Mr.郷路. He will speak on, he will give you online speech from Sapporo, Hokkaido. Then later on, Mrs. Sakamoto is taking part in this conference. Later on, she will speak shortly from gender point of view on this matter. Well, let's start from Mr. Takada, please.
高さんよろしくお願いします。
はい、皆さんこんにちは。私の所属する戦争させない救助を壊すな総がかり行動実行委員会は2014年から15年にかけて安倍晋三政権がやってきた憲法違反の集団的自衛権行使を合憲解釈するための安保法制に反対して従来の日本のさまざまな市民運動の意見の違いを持った人々が大同団結して結成した組織です。加盟団体の規模で言えば現在の日本の平和運動団体の中では最大のネットワークだと考えています。当時安保法制反対の署名を1500万筆ほど集め2015年8月30日には国会周辺に12万人全国で50万人のデモをした経験があります。
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I represent Don't Wage War, Don't Destroy Article 9 Joint Action Committee, the largest network of peace movement organizations in Japan, which successfully mobilized 120,000 demonstrators around the Diet and 500,000 all over the country on August 30th, 2015, after having collected 15 million signatures from people who were opposed to the security legislation. If you remember, from 2014 to 2015, then Prime Minister Abe Shinzo and his cabinet was trying to establish constitutionality of collective self-defense, which remains unconstitutional today, under the name of this security legislation.
今回の安倍国葬に対しては総がかり行動実行委員会が呼びかけて現在83なんですけれども市民団体が参加して安倍元首相国葬反対実行委員会を結成して全国の市民運動と連携をしてほとんど毎日反対行動をしています。すでに8月31日には国会正門前で4000人の市民の大行動を行い、この後19日ですけれども、代々木公園で1万人規模以上の大集会を予定しています。ここには国会議員や有名な落合恵子作家の沢地久江、ルポライターの鎌田聡などや福島原発沖縄基地闘争青年女性などが発言し渋谷の街を2コースに分かれて大きなデモンストレーションを行う予定です。
Now, this Joint Action Committee has called on to like-minded civic associations to form the Anti-Kokso Steering Committee, which now leads rallies against the state funeral for Abe almost daily around the country. On August 31st, 4,000 people rallied in front of the Kokkai Gijido, the Diet building. In coming September 19th, we are organizing another rally in Yoyogi Public Park with more than 10,000 demonstrators. Speakers will include members of the Diet, well-known writers Ochiai Keiko and Sawachi Hisae, as well as Kamata Satoshi, a renowned journalist for distinguished reportage. Activists against Fukushima nuclear power plant or military bases in Okinawa will also join organizations for youth and women to speak against the state funeral and stage protest marches in 2 routes in Shibuya Ward.
国葬20日の国葬予定の直前にはほ とんど連日東京でも大きな行動が入っておりまして、特に26日の新宿駅西口の大講堂と27日国葬当日の国会正門前大講堂には力を入れています。私たちは政府が日本武道館周辺に参列者以外の立ち入りを制限するというふうに決めたことに対して抗議をしています。
Running up to the day of the state funeral, the steering committee will organize street actions almost daily, especially focusing on the major actions on the west of Shinjuku Station on September 26th and one in front of the Kokkai Gijido on September 27th. We protest against the government's decision to restrict entry of general public into the precinct of Nippon Budokan on the day, as described by the outline of execution of the state funeral. We are going to mobilize a greater number of protesters.
はい、国会正門前という立憲主義の象徴の場所で、私たちは武道館の国葬に対抗して集会をやりますが、ここには立憲野党各党の国会議員と市民から前の法政大学総長の田中優子さん、政治学者の五ノ井郁夫さん、劇作家の伊手洋二さん、日本の伝統仏教会から浄土真宗の小竹清張さん、在日外国人組織から韓国の日本軍慰安婦問題に取り組むヤン・チンジャさん、在日ビルマ市民労働組合の民水会長など多彩な人々が一緒に集会をやる予定です。
We are mobilizing these people in front of the symbol of the constitutionalism in Kokkai Gijido, and we should outnumber the mourners at Budokan to demonstrate the true public opinion. Outside the Diet, we are expecting to hear from pro-constitution Diet members, in addition to Tanaka Yuko, the former president of Hosei University, Gonoi Ikuo, a professor of politics at Takachiho University, Sakade Yoji, a playwright, Kotake Masanori, a Buddhist of Jodo Shinshu, and the Secretary General of Nembutsusha 9 Jodo-kai, or Buddhist Circle for Article 9. They will be joined by foreign activists living in Japan, Yan Chinja, known for her efforts for comfort women, and Min Sui, the president of Citizens Labor Union of Burmese in Japan.
安倍さんの国葬には実施のための法的根拠が存在せず、憲法が保障する信教の自由、良心の自由などに反する憲法違反の企てだと考えています。岸田首相が安倍国葬を強行する狙いは、多くの人々が疑問や批判を持っている安倍氏の政治的立場や政治的姿勢を全面的に容認し、国家として安倍政治を賛美・礼賛することにあると考えています。
Holding the state funeral for Abe lacks any legal justification. In our view, it's an attempt to infringe on the freedom of religion and conscience guaranteed by the Constitution. Why is Prime Minister Kishida forcing his way to have the state funeral? Knowing that Abe's political positions and postures are being questioned, if not criticized, Kishida wants to use the occasion to have them all condoned and to get this country to glorify and praise Abe politics, or Abenomics, if you like.
死を悼む人々の心につけ込んで戦争を賛美した戦前のように安倍元首相が推進し、岸田首相が継承する憲法の改正や大軍拡など戦争する国づくりに人々を動員することは許されないと考えています。以上です。
We should not tolerate the act of taking advantage of people's natural reaction to the tragedy, the sympathy for the dead. We should not allow mobilization of well-wishing people for the purpose of constitutional amendments or massive arms buildups that Abe wanted to promote, just like in pre-war period, and Kishida appears to have succeeded. This country should never go to war. Thank you.
Then, Mr. Ina, give your speech, please.
Thank you. Please look at page 7 of this collected papers. This is my manuscript of my speech. So today I'd like to point out some constitutional issues concerning the state funerals from the perspective of a constitutional scholar. State funeral establishes a pecking order for human life and have its origin in the status order under the Constitution of Empire of Japan. This is a former constitution. In pre-war Japan, the emperor specifically selected those who had performed great deeds for nation to be given state funerals. Under the logic of national mourning for those who had served the emperor and state, pre-war state funerals were used as a way to enhance the emperor's ruling ideology and state control. Therefore, this time, execution of the state funeral rites, the government calls it state funeral rites or ceremony, may violate Article 14, Paragraph 1 of the current Constitution of Japan, which stipulates equality under the law, and Article 14, Paragraph 2, which stipulates the abolition of status system. The National Funeral Ordinance, which was a basis for the implementation of state funerals under the former constitution, was revoked in 1947 by the law concerning the validity, etc., of provisions of orders currently in force at the time of the enforcement of the Constitution of Japan. This was because it was incompatible with the freedom of thought and conscience and the principle of separation of church and state stipulated in the new constitution. But on July 22nd, the government made a cabinet decision based on the lawful establishment of the cabinet office and is now planning to hold a state funeral on September 27th. However, the provisions of this law only stipulate that cabinet has jurisdiction over the implementation of both the national ceremony and the ceremony conducted by the cabinet. So there is no other law governing the implementation of national funerals. Therefore, state funerals have no legal basis whatsoever. Under constitutionalism, we constitutional scholar, we respect, this is a fundamental principle of the Constitution. Constitutionalism, cabinet, not only cabinet and other state organs cannot do anything that is not authorized by law. The government's unilateral and arbitrary decision and the failure to provide a proper explanation to Diet is an act of clear disregard for the Diet. Diet is a representative body of the Japanese people and is an act that shakes the very foundation of democracy. The opposition parties demanded a decision to convene an extraordinary session of the Diet, but the cabinet unjustifiably refused to do so. Instead, it attempted to dodge criticism by holding a closed session of the House of the Representatives and the House of Councillors Steering Committee for only 1 hour, an hour and a half each. Such an attitude is, I dare say, this is a mockery of the Diet. Diet is a supreme organ of the state, and the denial of opposition would like to demand an extraordinary session and a disregard for fiscal constitutionalism. So it, which places national treasury expenditures under the authority of a resolution by the Diet. Also, the Chief Cabinet Secretary has stated that the public schools will not be closed on the day of the state funeral. The government conduct of the state funeral and the images shown on television on that day could have a significant impact on the general public, Japanese people. The government may request a specific time for the public to express their condolences and may recommend the use of mourning flags in public institutions. All of these would constitute a violation of fundamental human rights guaranteed by the Japanese Constitution. First, they violate the freedom of thought and conscience, which is guaranteed by Article 19. In other words, it is a freedom of the inner mind which protects the core human thought, and any restrictions on this freedom must be strictly scrutinized. According to Article 19, particular care must be taken to ensure that the state funeral should not force children to participate in them as school events. Second, there is a risk of infringing on the freedom of religion guaranteed by Article 20. Also, the Japanese government says that it expects state funerals to be conducted in a non-religious manner, but many people in Japan would accept them as a part of religious rites as long as they are related to the death of an individual. Third, there would be a violation of freedom of expression guaranteed in the Article 29. Finally, all the government's explanation is that such state funerals are not mandatory, but in reality, they would violate the dignity of the individual. I think this is the most important thing in the Constitution, dignity of the individuals, and the right of the individual to decide what they should be as human beings, as guaranteed in Article 13, because they would go against the beliefs of the individual. In conclusion, if the state funeral is intended to glorify the deceased more than necessary and keep them in the public memory for political effect, as well as for the survival of the current administration, Kishida government, all of these would violate the structure of the Constitution of Japan, which seeks to strictly constrain the actions of the state. Thank you for your attention.
Then we'll have online speech from Sapporo, Hokkaido, Mr.郷路柾記speech. He is a representative caretaker of National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales. He has been practicing law for the former believers of the Unification Church, 100 plaintiffs. He has been practicing law and won the cases in the district court of Sapporo, all through the district, appellate, and Supreme Court. He won all the cases from district court to Supreme Court. His remarks will be kind of interesting. Please, Mr. Goro, please.
はい。私は1987年3月19日に札幌地方裁判所に統一教会の伝道強化活動、信者獲得の方法が対象となる国民の信教の自由を侵害して違法であるという訴訟に発展する裁判を起こしました。
On March 19th, in 1987, I brought the civil damage lawsuit against the Unification Church with Sapporo District Court, representing the former believers whose freedom of religion has been infringed by the church's evangelizing and programming methods.
この裁判はその後20名の原告で行われるようになり、14年後の2001年6月29日、正体を隠した伝道は原告らの信教の自由を侵害する恐れがあったもので違法として原告らが全面的に勝訴しました。この訴訟は最高裁まで戦われましたが、原告の勝訴判決が維持されました。その後私は現在まで合計100名程度の原告によって 合計7件の訴訟の原告ら代理人として活動しています。
14 years later, on June 29, 2001, the district court ruled in favor of the 20 plaintiffs. The court ruled that evangelizing under false pretense constitutes an unlawful act, as it may have infringed on the freedom of religion of the plaintiffs. The defendant appealed, but the appellate and the Supreme Courts upheld the district court's decision. Since then, I have been representing about 100 plaintiffs against the Unification Church in 7 separate lawsuits.
そのような体験から私は、統一教会の教義や受講生や統一教会員の心理についての認識を持つようになりました。その経験に従って発言をします。
Today, I wish to share with you my insight in the Church's doctrine and the victim's psychology, which I came to understand through my practice.
統一教会員にとって、すべての亡くなった人は霊界で生きています。それは統一教会員にとっては、おとぎ話でも空想でもなく、リアルな現実的な認識です。安倍元首相も例外ではありません。安倍元首相はこれからも永遠に霊界で生き続けます。人間は神のような人格に成長して地上天国イコール神主権の国で生活するようになる。そして死んだらそのまま天上天国で生活するようになる。それが統一原理による理想国家論です。
The Unification Church cultists believe in the spiritual world after death. For them, the spiritual world is as real as the secular world, not a fairy tale nor a crazy imagination. The late Prime Minister Abe also lives on forever in this world after death. The cult upholds the unification principle of utopia. The followers are made to believe that one can practice this religion to raise his status close to that of God and live in the secular heaven in God's sovereignty and move to the heavenly heaven after death.
ところが、アダムとエヴァの堕落によって国家主権もサタンに奪われたため、現在の国家はサタン主権国家、地上地獄になってしまっています。その主権を神に取り戻し、地上天国、神主権の国家を作らなければなりません。それはサタンの勢力との激しい戦いを神側の勢力が勝ち抜くことによって実現されます。統一教会員は教義によってそう信じています。
But since Adam and Eve went astray, Satan took over the sovereignty of the secular world, thus making it a secular hell. Regaining that sovereignty and building the secular heaven through fierce battle is the mission of the cultists.
2012年、第二次安倍内閣について、次のような一信者の統一教会での講義を受けての感想文があります。神様の願う世界が地上に作られるように、今後大変化が現れる時に入っていきますね。日本は国民が目覚めてきていますが、安倍首相を棟梁として国民が頑張りましょう。すなわち統一教会員にとって生前の安倍元首相は神様の願う国を地上に実現するという統一教会の宗教的政治的目的のために棟梁、すなわち指導者、中心の人として教えられていたのです。
In 2012, one follower wrote after a seminar offered by the Unification Church as follows, quote, "The world God wishes is being built on earth. As Japanese people are gradually waking up to the upcoming major changes, let us brace ourselves for the time under the leadership of Prime Minister Abe. The followers were taught that Abe was the leader in achieving the cult's religious and political purposes of building the secular heaven.
現在、霊界に生きている安倍元首相は、生前の行いやその悲劇的な死のゆえに、神の願う国実現のための事業を天から助けてくれる人、サタンや悪霊に対して共に戦ってくれる人、そのような人たちの指導者として位置づけられると思います。
Because of the tragic death he died and what he achieved while on earth, Abe, still alive in the spiritual world, is positioned as the leader in heaven who helps the cult's battle against Satan and other evil spirits.
これからのことを考えてみても、国の進路を決める重要な選挙や憲法改正のための国民投票などの課題があります。それらの一つ一つについて、統一教会員は神主権の国家建設の道程における神側とサタン側の戦いの一律化という捉え方をします。その戦いの中心に国葬によって国民全体の弔意を受けたとされる安倍元首相が霊界から私たちの戦いを励ましてくれている。サタンや悪霊人に対し共に戦ってくれていると認識すると思います。
Every time this nation makes important decisions through elections and referendums, for example, for constitutional amendments, the cult followers take them as milestones of the battle between God and Satan in their journey to build a nation under God's sovereignty. The state funeral will be interpreted as Abe receiving condolences of the entire nation, encouraging the followers from the spiritual world.
統一教会員は上司の指示があれば違法な行為も正しいこととして実践することができる人たちです。したがって統一教会員の違法なあるいは社会的に不相当な行為をも国葬が励ますことになってしまうだろうという比喩を禁じ得ません。
Let me remind you that the Unification Church followers act under the instruction of their superiors and even commit unlawful acts if so instructed. My concern is that the state funeral can be used as a justification of illegal or socially unacceptable acts by the cultists.
信教の自由が侵害された状態の統一教会員をさらなる違法行為者とさせないためにも私は国葬に反対します。
The followers are the victims of infringement of their religious freedom. I don't want them to become offenders of any laws. I hereby declare my strong opposition to the state funeral of Shinzo Abe.
Okay, so Sensei, what are you going to do? Sakamoto Sensei was going to make a brief speech first, and then we will Q&A. Okay. で、坂本さん、なんか一言お願いできるということなので、お願いいたします。
こんにちは。ご紹介いただきました、坂本洋子と申します。私は女性が結婚して名前を、一つにしなければいけないということで、ほとんどの女性たちが男性の名前に変えているということに対する不平等に対する反対運動をしている、NPO の理事長をしております。今回、国葬に反対する理由として、安倍首相が、統一教会との関係で問題になっているんですけれども、それは霊感商法だけではなくって教育に介入してきた、ジェンダーイクオリティを否定してきた、それを教育で教え込もうとしてきた人だからです。で、
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am Sakamoto Yoko.I represent an NPO which fights against inequality for gender. That is, in Japan, you have to remember that almost all the women have to change her surname after marriage. Now, we are in the position of being against the kokuso or state funeral for Abe, not because of his association with the Unification Church, which is infamous for predatory spiritual sales scheme, but because he intervened in the area of education for gender equality.
今年アメリカで中絶に対して、これは憲法上の権利ではないという判決が出されたんですけれども、これも政治に影響されて9人中6人が、憲法上の権利ではないとしたんですけれども、これを、日本で行ってきたのが安倍首相であると、ということで、私たちの、もちろん家族の多様化にも反対しますし、リプロダクティブ・ヘルス&ライツのライツを攻撃してきた、そしてそれを教育で徹底的に教えてきた、性教育を否定してきたということです。
This year, if you remember, in the United States, 6 out of 9 Supreme Court judges voted for the unconstitutionality of abortion. And just like that, Mr. Abe was a person who represents the same type of a thought in this country. He has denied the diversity of families. He has denied the rights of people for reproductive health. And he has intervened in the education for gender equality.
自由民主主義法の支配を、共通認識として持っていると、国際社会で高々と言っていたんですけれども、これを完全に否定してきたのが安倍さんです。ですから私たち女性ジェンダー問題をやっている人たちにとっては、安倍さんというのは本当にジェンダーに対して不平等を進めてきた人だということで、反対をしております。
He has ostensibly upheld freedom, democracy, rule of law in the international communities. However, in reality, he did not really represent any of those, because for gender activists like ourselves, he's a person who promoted inequality in gender.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for speeches. So let's go to Q&A. And we want to start from the floor. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. And if you're designated, come forward. There are 2 microphones on both ends of the head table. Cite your name and affiliation if you have. And please limit to your question, not the speech. Okay, who want to go first? Okay, go ahead.
My name is Richard Susilo from Indonesian newspaper Tribun News. I respect the joint movement opposing this state funeral, and also I respect the person who support. So I'm in the middle of this part for this state funeral. At the end of the speech of Mr. Takada Ken, you plan to make a demonstration on 26th at West Shinjuku and 27th at the main gate of Parliament building. So at the same time, on 27th of September, the foreign guests of honor from some countries will come to Japan also. So my question is, do you still want, especially on 27th of September, do you still want to make a demonstration in this main gate of Parliament building? Because why? For your information, in Indonesia, my country, if the leader passed away, and we make a state funeral, 1 day or even 1 week, we are still silent. We respect the death of our leader, both opposing and supporting the leader. So this is our culture in Indonesia, but not in Japan. I'm so surprised. You are still demonstration at the day of funeral, state funeral. So please, once again, are you still want to have a demonstration on 27th of September? Thank you.
So this is a question for Takada-san.
Yes.
Okay. Can you translate first?
インドネシアのものでございますが、高田先生に質問させていただきます。私、国葬反対を唱えていらっしゃる皆様も、また国葬を行うべきだと考えていらっしゃる皆様も、両方を尊重する立場にございます。すなわち、これに関しては中立の立場です。で、その上で質問させていただきたいんですが、高田先生のお話では、9月26日には新宿において大講堂を、それから9月27日においては、国会の正門前での大講堂を行うということでありました。9月27日といえば、国葬の当日で、その日には海外の要人も数多く来日されることと存じます。インドネシアにおいては、国のリーダーが亡くなった場合には、1日から、あるいは場合によっては1週間ほど、国全体が喪に服します。賛成派も反対派も同様に、そのリーダーに対する尊敬の念を示すためであります。高田先生は本当に国葬の日当日に国会前でのデモをどうしても強行されたいと思っていらっしゃるのでしょうか。
じゃあお願いします。
はい、ありがとうございます。先ほども言いましたけれども、今度の武道館の周辺には一般の市民の立ち入りは制限されております。そして特定の認められた人々しかあそこには参加できない、そういうやり方自身がどうなのかというふうに、私は日本国憲法の精神からしても、多くの市民が自由に自分の意思を表明することを妨げるというのは全く間違いであって、そういう場合に市民がどういう表現方法があるかといえば、やっぱり立憲主義、民主主義の象徴である国会議事堂の正門において自分たちが集まって意思表示をする、そのことが大事だと思います。人の死を悼むことと、安倍さんの政治的な業績がどうだったかという評価をすること、あるいは自分たちの意思を表明すること、それぞれ別のことと思っています。そういうことで集会を予定しています。
Thank you very much for your question. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier, we are planning to have this rally on the day of the national state funeral. On that day, Budokan, the funeral site, will have limited access, to the general public, and only selected people will be allowed to enter the vicinity of Budokan. I believe that is totally against the spirit of the Constitution, which protects representation of the free will of the people. Now, in order to make sure that our voices are to be heard, I still plan, of course, to mobilize people for this major rally and outside, the Diet building, which is a symbol of the constitutionalism. Mourning for the death of an individual is one thing. Evaluating the political track record of that person is another thing. And yet there is another thing that we have to remember that we all respect. That is the individual's free will to be expressed in any way that that individual wishes.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Ilgin Yorulmaz for BBC World Turkish. I have a short question for each one of our speakers, and if I may ask each one of them. To Takada-san first. It was mentioned 83 citizens groups were involved in fact, in this coalition. Why were they ineffective in opposing Abe's policies when he was alive and when he kept all these elections? to Ina Sensei. I believe in 1967 a state funeral was held for former Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida. How can the public mourn Abe properly and legally according to the Constitution? What about the rights of people who are mourning for Abe? And finally, for Goro Sensei, was Yamagami Tetsuya a victim or an offender according to your definition? Thank you.
Okay. 通訳ちょっとお願いします。
3人の先生方に1人ずつ短い質問をさせていただきたく思います。ちなみにトルコの BBC ワールドから参っております。まず高田先生、83の市民団体が結集しているということだったんですけれども、この団体は安倍総理が存命中になぜその政策を効果的に止めることができなかったのでしょうか。なぜ安倍晋三が選挙に勝ち続けることをこのように多くの市民団体は許してしまったのでしょうかという質問であります。稲先生、1967年吉田茂の国葬が行われたかと思います。この際にもやはりその人々の悼む権利というのは合法的であると考えられたためかと思うのですけれども、先生は安倍元総理を悼む人々の権利についてはどのようにお考えになっていらっしゃるのでしょうか。最後に郷路先生に伺います。山上徹也は先生の見解で言うと犠牲者なのでしょうか、それとも違法行為者なのでしょうか。以上です。
高田先生からどうぞ。
はい、ありがとうございます。言われる通り、なぜ私たちが安倍政権が8年も続いたのか、このことについては本当に悔しい思いをしています。全力を挙げてこの間、野党と市民が一緒になって、この政権を倒すための行動をしてきました。力及ばずです。申し訳ないと思っていますけれども、私たちは今考えてみると、こういう安倍政権が勝利してきた背景に統一教会があって、この人たちと安倍政権が非常に醜い癒着をして違法行為も含めてさまざまにやってきたことを今改めて知りました。ですからこれからそれに対する批判も含めて全力を挙げてこれから安倍政権の後継である岸田政権を変えて政治を変えるためにさらに力を尽くしていきたいと思っています。ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your question. It is very true. It is to our chagrin, as a matter of fact, that we had allowed the Abe administration to continue for 8 years. The opposition parties and civic groups worked together to prevent the re-election of Abe's government. However, we failed. We did not have enough power. In retrospect, however, now we realize Abe's success in being re-elected came out of the fact that there was a major support from the Unification Church. His party members had been exposed to have had some corruption as well as some deep relationship of the Unification Church, and that must have been behind their successful re-election and re-elections. Going forward, knowing that there was such a corruption existed, we will continue to work together to change politics and change the administration under Kishida going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Previous case, so it's a true Yoshida case, but at the time there was a big controversy and there was no legal basis at the time. And your question is especially important is that, yes, we do not deny the people's right to mourn, because, but we, our side, do not want to mourn him because of he's a person who especially destroy the fundamental principle of the Constitution, pacifism, Constitution, and also the most important thing is state cannot enforce state funeral by the only cabinet decision. So Kishida government must ask the people, this is good or this is not. And they had to explain the reason why they would like to do it or do not. They have to explain it. The most important thing is that we do not deny the people's right to mourn, but the state cannot enforce it.
Okay. 郷路先生お願いします。
はい。
日本語にしますか。
大丈夫です。
はい。
はい。安倍元首相に対する関係では、山上容疑者は違法行為者であると私は思います。現在の裁判所で行われている関係の結果、心神喪失とかという銃が認定されなければ、法的に彼はその責任を負わなければいけません。ただ、山上容疑者は統一教会との関係では被害者だというふうに私は思っています。彼は統一教会によってその家庭の経済的基盤を奪われ、母親まで奪われてしまった。その結果、人生を結論としては破滅させることになったという点で、統一教会との関係では被害者であるというふうに考えています。法的な責任がどこにあるかということを抜きにして、この事件全体の本当の責任者というのを考えてみる。私は統一教会であるというふうに考えています。以上です。
Thank you for your question. Whether Yamagami is an offender or victim. Well, in terms of the incident, the tragedy that happened to Abe, Yamagami certainly is an offender. There is a court examination ongoing for his legal competency in assuming the responsibility. But anyway, he did what he did. However, in relation to the Unification Church, I would call him a victim because the Unification Church deprived him of his family's economic basis, deprived him of his mother, and literally destroyed his life. So, the legal competency set aside, I would regard the sole responsibility should be shouldered by the Unification Church in this case.
Okay, next question. Anyone from the floor? Okay, Karen.
こんにちは。今日の記者会見ありがとうございます。ラジオフランスの特派員西村と申します。一点お願いします。誰でもいいんですけど、答えは。デモはいくつかすでにありましたが、私はいくつか見たときに、やはり年齢の高い人の方が多いっていうような気がしますね。若者は無関心であるのか、それとも彼らは実際に安倍政権とか安倍総理の政策を支持していたのでしょうか。どちらだと思いますか。
I don't really know who to address this question, but my question relates to the attitude of the younger generation of this country. I have seen actual demonstrations being staged a number of times, and I saw many of the participants are rather in their older age bracket and not too many youngsters. I was wondering whether the young people are indifferent to this or probably they supported the Abe administration or Abe policies, which is the case.
そうですね。私たちのような世代は政治が変わるというのを信じてます、経験から。ところが今の若い人たちは安倍政権が8年続いて中で物心ついてからはほとんど政治が変わらないのを見てきた。で、政治が変わることを恐れてる、そういう面もあるんですね。だから決して今の若者が保守的だとは思わないんですけれども、私たちのような年代の者がその若者たちともっと接触をして話し合って政治は変えることができる、 政治を変えることを恐れてはいけない、そのことについてもっともっと努力が足りない、私たちの責任です。
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, my generation has an experience observing the changes of the government. The young people over the past 8 years have seen only Abe administration. Therefore, they have never observed the changes of the government, and they're probably a bit afraid of such changes. I wouldn't really call it the conservatism of the young people. However, it is a responsibility of the people of my generation to have greater interaction with the younger generation to convince them that governments can change and they should not be afraid of such changes. Currently, I really truly reflect on myself and say that we have not probably done enough in terms of talking with the young generation.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? No? Okay, if not, I have one question coming from online. This is from Fred Barco, freelance. What are your views of state funerals of monarchs such as the Emperor and Queen Elizabeth II? 皆さんのですね、王室や皇室の、に対するその、国葬についてはどのようなお考えでしょうか。例えば天皇、陛下の、国葬とか、あるいは今回ある、クイーンエリザベス2世、エリザベス女王のですね、国葬、についてはどのようなお考えをお持ちでしょうかという質問ですが、どなたか。
じゃあ、運着です。天皇については法律で決まっています。死んだ時にお葬式がありました。昭和天皇の時もそうですから。政治家についてお葬式したのはですね、After the end of the war, there was only one case former Prime Minister 吉田茂。政治家の場合はですね、政治的な評価が定まっておりませんよね。エリザベス女王が何十年も、クイーンだったということと、安倍さんが8年間首相だったんですけれども、安倍さんはどういう人ですかということについて1億2000万人の人がですね一致した見解を持っていないですね。ですから政治家の場合に国葬をやるというのは何の法的根拠もありません。これは独裁国家と同じです。民主国家ではありません。天皇については葬儀の規定があります。
As for the emperors and empress of the members of the royal family, there are laws stipulating the funeral for them. If you remember, we had a national funeral when the Emperor Showa passed away. Now, in the political field, Yoshida is an exceptional case after war that the national or state funeral was held. The problem with the politicians is that their political achievements, evaluation of the political achievements are never uniform. In case of Queen Elizabeth, she reigned for over tens of years, decades of history under the love of the nation. In case of Prime Minister Abe, he served as a Prime Minister for 8 years, but 120 million people of this country does not have the unified view on how to evaluate his political achievements. So there is no legal basis in having state funerals for politicians. This way of conducting things is never a democratic. It is something that can only happen in under dictatorship.
だからエリザベス女王の国葬については何かご意見なり発言はありますか？特にそれはいいですか？はい。Okay. If there's no more questions, I think we are about to wrap up the press conference. Is there any questions from the floor? No. Okay. You'll get to the last stand.
Hello again. It's actually just a confirmation. I believe Ina Sensei, you said there's no cabinet decision oh sorry, there is a cabinet decision to enforce public to express their condolences.
Yes.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, that's true.
Because I had the knowledge, I had the information that the cabinet did not issue such a statement, and to avoid the kind of conflict you're describing, no flags, half mast, for example. But you're saying there is a cabinet decision to enforce public condolences.
Hi.
Okay, thank you.
各社はいいですか。はい、稲先生に確認したく思いました。内閣の方で、この度、国民に対してその安倍総理の死を悼むことを、進めるべく決定がなされたというお話が先ほどあったかと思うんですけれども、私が聞いたところでは、そのようなことを、声明として発表してしまうといろいろと、問題も起こりそうなので発表はしないというふうにも聞いていたので、そのあたりの事実確認をさせていただきました。
簡単に申し上げていいですか。briefly,
お願いします。
and so in fact, the cabinet, just じゃあすみません、正確に日本語で言います。内閣がしたのはですね、内閣府設置法という法律に基づいて決めましたということです。でその時に私たちは弔意の強制もしませんということを内閣官房長官は言ってるんですけれども、もうすでに安倍さんの私的なお葬式の時にですね、全部で6つの日本中の教育委員会が弔旗を挙げなさい、弔意を表明しなさいという通達を教育委員会からそれぞれの学校の校長に出しています。でこれはですね、実質的な強制です。言われた方はしなければならない。で今回もですね、しませんと言ってますけれども、もうですね、いくつかの情報で実際その弔意の強制、を行うだろうということで、これは明白な思想良心の自由侵害に当たるというふうに考えております。すいません。
Actually, what the cabinet decided to do was, cabinet made a decision, as you said, under the Cabinet Establishment Act, and the Prime Minister's spokesperson talked about not forcing any individuals in general public to express condolences for Prime Minister. However, what happened afterwards was as follows. When the private funeral was held for former Prime Minister Abe, 6 education boards across the country issued instructions to principals of schools in their jurisdictions for the half flag as well as expression of condolences. So, even if the government insists that they are not going to force the nation to mourn over Abe's death, actually there are already moves to force school children to do so. And that certainly is an infringement of the people's right to freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and certainly of democracy.
一応確認なんですが、閣議決定として、弔意を求める、各府省やその関係機関に、弔意の表明を求める閣議決定もしくは閣議了解というのはなかったのかという質問だったんですけど、それ閣議決定、閣議了解という形でその弔意を求めるのはないという理解でいいですね。
はい、それはありませんでした。
It's important. Can you translate that too?
As a matter of fact, there was no decision made by the cabinet to ask any organizations to formally express condolences.
So there's no official decision by the cabinet, but Sensei is saying that there's in effect such moves are that does exist. So that's what he's saying. Okay, well, thank you very much. So I think we're going to wrap up the press conference. 浅田先生、もう大丈夫ですか？これで。はい。Okay, so I was going to wrap up this press conference, and thank you for coming for the press conference at FCCJ. Meeting is adjourned.